What if I told you that the very stones beneath your feet in an ancient city were never just stones? They were silent enforcers of law, instruments of peace, and architects of order. Picture yourself walking through the sun-baked remains of a place like Mohenjo-Daro or Urak. At first glance, you might see crumbling walls, empty courtyards, and forgotten pathways. But look closer. Every alley was plotted with purpose. Every temple was positioned with intention. Every gate, every well, every public space. It was all part of a grand design, a hidden blueprint for how to keep society from unraveling. This is the story of how architecture didn't just house civilization. It shaped it, governed it, and in many ways saved it. From the Zigurates of Mesopotamia that reached toward the heavens to the sophisticated water systems of the Indus Valley that ensured fairness and health, ancient builders and rulers understood something profound. The spaces we inhabit shape how we behave, how we interact, and how we govern one another. They realized that to maintain peace, you couldn't just rely on laws written on clay or spoken by kings. You had to build those principles into the world around you, into the streets people walked, the walls that protected them, and the temples that inspired them. In this video, we're going to unravel these hidden blueprints for peace. We'll explore how urban planning, sacred geometry, fortifications, and public spaces were used to enforce order, inspire unity, and prevent conflict long before modern governments ever existed. You'll come away with a new lens through which to see the ancient world, and perhaps even our cities today, because the truth is, the echoes of these designs are all around us, hidden in plain sight. So let's step into the past together and decode the architectural secrets that helped build and sustain some of history's most remarkable civilizations. Long before skyscrapers and subway systems, the world's very first cities were emerging from the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, and they were far more than just collections of buildings. They represented humanity's first grand experiment in using architecture itself as a tool for governance. Take the ancient city of Urak, for example. This wasn't a place that just grew organically over time in a haphazard way. It was meticulously planned, with a layout that would feel surprisingly familiar to us today. Wide processional avenues led directly to the city's heart, the towering ziggurat dedicated to the goddess Inanna. Surrounding this central, sacred power were neighborhoods arranged in a remarkably grid-like pattern of streets and alleyways. This design was no accident. For the rulers of Urak, this organized structure was a masterstroke of social control. The wide, straight streets allowed for the easy and rapid movement of soldiers and officials. If a dispute broke out in a merchant's quarter or unrest simmered in a residential district, authority could be physically present in a matter of minutes, not hours. This ability to project power swiftly was a powerful deterrent against chaos. Furthermore, the centralized location of the temple and the palace complex wasn't just for show. It placed the twin pillars of authority, the divine and the royal, at the absolute center of daily life. Every time a citizen looked up, they saw the ziggurat looming on the horizon, a constant stone and clay reminder of who held power and their connection to the gods. This architectural strategy extended to the most practical aspects of life. The orderly grid made the management of resources incredibly efficient. Officials could easily monitor the distribution of grain, track trade goods moving through the city, and collect taxes with far greater accuracy. This efficient resource management was crucial for preventing the scarcities and inequalities that often lead to social unrest. By designing a city where everything and everyone had a clear place, the rulers of Urak created a visible, tangible framework for law and order. The city itself became the ultimate enforcer, its very pathways channeling human activity in predictable, governable ways. This revolutionary approach to urban planning set a powerful precedent, providing a blueprint for stability that would be studied, adapted, and implemented by countless civilizations that followed, all seeking that same elusive goal, lasting peace through design. But if the orderly streets of Urak were the skeleton of early governance, then the monumental structures that dominated their skylines were the very heart and soul of it. These weren't just buildings, they were power made visible, a physical argument for the legitimacy of the ruler that was impossible to ignore. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its construction was an almost unimaginable undertaking, requiring the labor of thousands for decades. Why would a society commit such immense resources to a single structure? The answer lies in the message it was designed to broadcast. The pyramid was far more than a tomb. It was a definitive statement that the pharaoh was not merely a man. He was a god-king, an incarnation of Horus, whose authority was as permanent, as precise, and as unassailable as the millions of stone blocks meticulously stacked towards the heavens. This connection to the divine was engineered into every aspect of these sacred structures through what we now call sacred geometry. The Zigurates of Mesopotamia, with their stepped, towering forms, were literally stairways to the gods, placing the priest-king at the pinnacle, both physically and spiritually. The mathematical precision involved was breathtaking. The alignment of the pyramids with celestial bodies like the Orion constellation wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate act of cosmic anchoring. It told every citizen, from the highest official to the lowest laborer, that their ruler's power was woven into the fundamental fabric of the universe itself. To challenge that authority was to challenge the order of the stars and the will of the gods, an act of both treason and blasphemy that was almost unthinkable. The sheer scale of these projects played a crucial psychological role. Standing at the base of a ziggurat or gazing up at a pyramid, an individual felt small, overwhelmed by a magnitude that transcended human capability. This deliberate awe was a powerful tool for social control. It fostered a collective identity centered around this shared, monumental achievement and the divine leadership that made it possible. It discouraged rebellion not just through fear, but by creating a sense of pride and belonging to something eternal and greater than oneself. The peace maintained by these structures was not just the absence of conflict, it was a peace built on a universally accepted hierarchy, where the ruler's divine mandate was as solid and ever-present as the stone that shaped the city's horizon. This architectural strategy of blending overwhelming scale with spiritual significance became a timeless blueprint for legitimizing power and ensuring compliance across the ancient world. Yet for all the psychological power of sacred monuments and the orderly control of gridded streets, ancient rulers faced a far more immediate and visceral threat to peace, the constant specter of invasion and internal rebellion. This is where architecture took on a far more muscular and imposing role, transforming from a symbol of authority into a literal shield for civilization. Consider the ancient city of Jericho, one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited settlements. Its most famous archaeological feature isn't a palace or a temple, but its massive stone fortification wall, complete with a towering watchtower dating back thousands of years. This was not a mere property line. It was a stark, physical declaration of boundaries and a formidable barrier against any outside force. The message to nomadic tribes or rival city-states was simple and unequivocal. We are here to stay, and we are prepared to defend what is ours. This defensive mindset reached a highly sophisticated level with civilizations like the Hittites in Anatolia. Their capital, Hattusa, was not protected by a single wall, but by a complex, multi-layered system of monumental stone ramparts, heavily fortified gates, and underground postern tunnels for surprise counterattacks. The famous Lion Gate and King's Gate at Hattusa were not just entrances. They were intimidating psychological operations carved in stone, guarded by massive sculpted beasts and warrior gods meant to intimidate any approaching army and fill the city's own inhabitants with awe and confidence. The engineering was brilliant, with walls constructed using a method called Cyclopean masonry, featuring enormous, irregularly shaped boulders that fit together so tightly a knife blade couldn't slip between them, making them incredibly resistant to battering rams and earthquakes alike. The impact of these fortifications extended far beyond mere physical protection. For the people living within these walls, the constant, looming presence of such immense defenses provided an invaluable sense of security. This psychological safety was a critical foundation for peace. When citizens are not living in a state of perpetual fear, fear of a midnight raid, fear of being enslaved, fear of losing everything, they are far more likely to engage in the activities that build a stable society: farming, trading, crafting, and raising families. This secure environment allowed the governing body to shift its focus and resources from perpetual defense to proactive internal governance. Instead of spending the entire treasury on raising emergency armies, a government could invest in law courts, irrigation projects, and public works that improved daily life and strengthened the social contract. Furthermore, these walls served as a powerful dual deterrent. Externally, they signaled to any potential aggressor that a costly and likely futile siege would be required, making conquest an unattractive proposition. Internally, they were a constant reminder of the state's overwhelming power and its ability to contain any dissent. A rebellious faction inside the city would quickly find itself not only facing the ruler's guards, but also trapped within the very walls that symbolized his strength. In this way, defensive architecture became one of the most effective and enduring tools for peace in the ancient world, proving that sometimes the best way to secure tranquility is to build a formidable barrier against chaos. While walls and temples projected power from above, some of the most ingenious ancient architectural strategies for peace were literally buried underground, addressing the most fundamental human need: water. In the arid landscapes where civilizations first took root, control over water was synonymous with control over life itself. A drought could unravel a society in weeks, and unequal access to this precious resource was a guaranteed recipe for resentment and rebellion. This is why the architects of the Indus Valley civilization, particularly in their magnificent city of Mohenjo-Daro, didn't just build with stone and clay. They engineered an entire hydrological ecosystem designed for one paramount goal: equitable stability. Walking through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro today, you wouldn't immediately see grand palaces or towering pyramids. Instead, you'd find evidence of something arguably more revolutionary: a city-wide commitment to public sanitation and water distribution that was unparalleled in the ancient world. Every single house, from the largest courtyard dwelling to the more modest residences, had its own dedicated bathing area and a toilet, an astonishing feat of urban planning. But the real genius lay in what connected them all: a sophisticated, city-wide network of meticulously laid brick drains ran beneath the streets, channeling wastewater away from homes and into covered main sewers. This wasn't a haphazard system. It was a masterclass in municipal engineering, built with a clear understanding of gradients, flow, and public health. The centerpiece of this hydraulic harmony was the Great Bath, a massive, waterproofed public tank that likely served both ritual and social purposes. But its importance goes beyond ceremony. In a world where water was divinity and life, providing a central, communal source for cleansing and gathering was a profound act of political wisdom. It sent an unmistakable message: the well-being of every citizen, regardless of their social standing, was a priority of the state. By architecturally ensuring that clean water was not a luxury hoarded by an elite few but a managed public good, the rulers of Mohenjo-Daro preemptively dismantled the primary source of class-based conflict. This infrastructural foresight had a domino effect on social stability. Efficient drainage meant fewer stagnant pools of water, which meant fewer outbreaks of waterborne diseases like cholera or dysentery. A healthier populace is a more productive populace, capable of working the fields, engaging in trade, and contributing to the city's prosperity rather than draining its resources through illness. Furthermore, a society not ravaged by plague is a society less likely to panic, less susceptible to the scapegoating and civil unrest that often accompanies epidemics. The government, by investing in this unseen architecture of pipes and drains, was not just building a sewer system, it was building trust. It demonstrated a practical, tangible form of care that laws and edicts alone could never achieve. The ultimate result was a remarkable degree of social cohesion. Archaeologists have noted the striking uniformity and quality of housing and infrastructure across Mohenjo-Daro, especially when compared to the stark disparities seen in contemporaneous Mesopotamia or Egypt. This suggests a society with fewer extreme class divisions and, consequently, less internal tension. The peace enjoyed by the Indus Valley people was not enforced solely by soldiers or decrees. It was flowing right beneath their feet in the constant, reliable movement of clean water in and wastewater out. Their architectural brilliance lay in understanding that true governance isn't just about controlling people, it's about cultivating the conditions for their health and dignity, turning the basic necessity of water into the most powerful mortar for holding a peaceful society together. But after investing in walls for defense and pipes for public health, how did ancient leaders address the simmering tensions that inevitably arise within any society? The answer lies not in grand monuments or hidden infrastructure, but in the creation of open, accessible space. The Greeks and Romans pioneered a revolutionary architectural concept: the dedicated public square designed not for commerce or ceremony alone, but for the messy, vital work of self-governance. In the heart of Athens, the Agora was the vibrant nucleus of civic life. This was not an empty plaza. It was a carefully orchestrated environment surrounded by stoas, long, colonnaded walkways that provided shade and shelter. Under these covered porticos, philosophers like Socrates engaged in spirited dialogue, while just steps away, citizens gathered to debate legislation, serve on juries, or listen to announcements from elected officials. The very design of the space, with its open sightlines and acoustics that carried the human voice, was engineered to foster communication and collective participation. It was an architectural declaration that every citizen, or at least every male citizen of status, had a right to be seen and heard in the matters of state. This idea was amplified on an even grander scale in the Roman Forum. While the Greek Agora often felt organic, the Forum was a powerful expression of imperial order, a sprawling complex of basilicas, temples, and speakers' platforms meticulously arranged around a central open area. The rostra, the famous speaker's platform, was positioned so an orator could address crowds gathered in the forum, his words echoing off the marble facades of the surrounding buildings. This architectural stagecraft was deliberate, transforming political speech into public spectacle, and ensuring that the ideas being debated reached the largest possible audience. The design didn't just allow for discourse, it amplified it, turning governance into a visible communal activity. By providing this sanctioned arena for the airing of grievances and the debate of ideas, these civilizations effectively built a pressure valve directly into their urban fabric. A citizen with a complaint could bring it to the forum, where it might be addressed through legal argument or public persuasion, rather than letting that frustration fester into a riot in a cramped back alley. This architectural innovation institutionalized conflict resolution. Disputes between merchants, arguments over property lines, or disagreements on public policy had a designated neutral ground for arbitration. This process moved conflict from the realm of private vendetta into the public sphere, where it could be managed according to agreed-upon rules and laws. The constant, daily use of these spaces for peaceful dialogue fostered a powerful culture of cooperation and civic duty. People became accustomed to resolving differences with words and votes instead of violence. They developed a shared identity not just as subjects of a ruler, but as active participants in a collective project. The Agora and the Forum were, in essence, the ancient world's most sophisticated technology for peace. They proved that by simply designing a space where people could come together as equals to talk, a society could build something far more durable than any wall, a lasting tradition of collaborative governance. Now consider the beating heart of this intricate system of governance, the palace complex. Far more than just a lavish royal residence, these structures were the central processing units of ancient administration, meticulously engineered to manage an empire. Take the magnificent palace of Knossos on Minoan, Crete. This was not a single, monolithic building but a vast, multi-story labyrinth of interconnected rooms, halls, and courtyards, a design so complex it likely inspired the myth of the Minotaur's maze. But every twist and turn of its corridors served a deliberate purpose. The palace was a meticulously organized machine for control. Vast storage magazines, lined with enormous clay jars called pithoi, held the kingdom's wealth of olive oil, wine, and grain, the economic lifeblood that could be distributed or withheld to maintain loyalty. The throne room itself, with its distinctive alabaster seat and surrounding frescoes of griffins, was not just a ceremonial space but the epicenter of power, designed for intimate, intimidating audiences. This architectural philosophy of centralized control reached its zenith with the Assyrian Empire, whose rulers constructed colossal palace fortresses like those at Nimrud and Nineveh. The palace of Ashurnasirpal II was a masterpiece of administrative intimidation. Visitors and officials alike would have to navigate a carefully choreographed path from the bustling outer courtyards, through heavily guarded gates adorned with colossal, human-headed bull statues known as lamashu, and into increasingly restricted inner courts. This deliberate journey was a psychological exercise in power projection, reminding all who entered of their place within the hierarchy. The layout was designed for maximum efficiency and security. Winged buildings housed specialized departments, one for military command, another for treasury officials, another for scribes. Messengers and administrators could move quickly along covered passageways between these wings, ensuring that intelligence from the far reaches of the empire reached the king's ears with minimal delay, and that his decrees were disseminated with equal speed. At the core of this efficiency were the palace archives, the ancient equivalent of a server room. In Assyrian palaces, these rooms were filled with thousands of clay tablets, each meticulously inscribed with cuneiform script. These were not just royal annals, they contained tax records, legal judgments, supply inventories for the army, and correspondence with provincial governors. This centralized repository of information was a revolutionary tool for governance. It meant that policy could be based on data, not just whim. A dispute over land ownership could be settled by referring to a property record from 20 years prior. A governor's request for additional troops could be cross-referenced with grain supply reports from his region. By architecturally housing this knowledge in the palace's secure core, the king ensured that information was power, and that power remained firmly in his hands. This reduced bureaucratic confusion and the potential for corrupt officials to manipulate records for their own gain, directly addressing a major source of public discontent. Ultimately, the design of these palaces made justice and administration not only consistent but also visibly accessible, albeit on the ruler's terms. The large public courtyards served as open-air waiting rooms where citizens could theoretically bring petitions before being filtered through layers of officials. This created a crucial illusion of direct access to the sovereign, a powerful tool for maintaining the social contract. People might grumble about a local tax collector, but if they believed that the king, in his magnificent, well-ordered palace, was ultimately just and that his system was efficient, they were far more likely to accept their lot. The palace, through its very architecture, became the ultimate symbol of a functioning state, a place where order was processed, decisions were made, and the chaotic complexities of human society were managed into a stable, governable peace. While palaces and forums served as the centralized brains of ancient governance, the streets that connected them were the vital circulatory system, pulsing with people, goods, and information. The design of these pathways was never a matter of mere convenience. It was a sophisticated tool for social control, a way to choreograph the very movement of a population to maintain order. Nowhere is this more stunningly evident than in the ancient metropolis of Teotihuacan, located just outside modern-day Mexico City. This was one of the largest cities in the ancient world at its peak, and its entire layout was a masterplan of geometric precision and symbolic power. The city is dominated by the colossal Avenue of the Dead, a wide, arrow-straight thoroughfare running for over 3 miles, flanked by the massive Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon. This wasn't just a road, it was a processional highway, a stage for religious and state ceremonies that reinforced the social hierarchy for all to see. But the genius of Teotihuacan's urban plan extends far beyond its main artery. The city is a perfect grid, with the Avenue of the Dead acting as the central axis from which hundreds of smaller, perfectly perpendicular streets branch off, creating a series of walled residential compounds. This grid system was a powerful mechanism for surveillance and control. The wide, straight avenues provided clear, unobstructed sightlines for patrols of guards or soldiers. Any gathering that looked like it might turn into an unruly crowd could be spotted from a distance, and authorities could respond swiftly before a minor disturbance escalated into a full-blown riot. The grid also made it incredibly difficult to hide. There were no twisting, maze-like alleys where criminals or dissidents could easily disappear. Movement was predictable, channeled, and highly visible, making the entire population easier to monitor and manage. This architectural strategy for controlling movement was employed across the ancient world, though with different local flavors. In the Roman Empire, the famous saying, "All roads lead to Rome," was more than just a metaphor. It was a statement of political and military reality. The Romans built an unparalleled network of straight, paved roads that connected every corner of their vast empire back to the capital. While these roads famously facilitated trade and the speedy movement of legions to distant trouble spots, their role in internal peacekeeping was just as critical. These roads allowed for the rapid transmission of information via courier systems, meaning a provincial governor could alert the emperor to signs of unrest almost immediately. More importantly, they allowed for the equally rapid deployment of forces to quell that unrest. A rebellion in Britannia could be met by legions marching from Gaul on roads built specifically for that purpose. The road itself was a constant, stone-paved reminder of Rome's ever-present authority, ensuring that even the most far-flung provinces remained under the watchful eye of the central government. Beyond military control, the regulation of trade was another key function of these design pathways. In Teotihuacan, the strategic placement of market plazas at key intersections along the main avenues allowed the state to oversee commercial activity efficiently. Officials could tax goods, standardize weights and measures, and prevent the black market trading of controlled commodities. This regulation was crucial for preventing the economic disparities and merchant disputes that often sparked social friction. By designing the pathways of commerce, the state could ensure a smoother, more equitable flow of resources, reinforcing economic stability, a fundamental pillar of any lasting peace. The very pavement beneath the citizens' feet was quietly, constantly working to direct their lives toward order, making the city itself the most pervasive and effective instrument of governance. But if the wide avenues and grand palaces represented the public face of ancient power, a more discreet and arguably more cunning form of social control was happening in the very neighborhoods where people lived and slept. Across the ancient world, from the meticulously planned cities of the Indus Valley to the sprawling capital of the Roman Empire, we see a recurring architectural strategy emerge: the deliberate separation of social classes through residential zoning. This was not a random outcome of urban growth. It was a calculated policy built in stone and clay, designed to manage the most volatile element in any society: human envy. By physically placing distance between the haves and the have-nots, ancient rulers engineered a powerful buffer against the class resentment that so often boils over into open conflict. The Indus Valley city of Harappa provides a fascinating early example of this principle in action. Unlike many other contemporary cities, Harappa and its sister city, Mohenjo-Daro, show remarkably little evidence of a single, colossal, opulent palace for a supreme ruler. Instead, the most striking feature is the uniformity and modularity of the housing. However, look closer at the urban plan, and a clear hierarchy emerges. The city was often divided into two distinct sectors. One area, frequently built on a raised mud brick platform, featured larger, more complex houses with multiple courtyards, private wells, and elaborate drainage systems. These were likely the homes of the elite administrators, wealthy merchants, and high-ranking priests. Just a short walk away, but distinctly separate, was the lower town. Here, the houses were smaller, more standardized, and densely packed together, suggesting they were occupied by artisans, laborers, and traders. This physical separation was a masterstroke of social engineering. By creating distinct districts, the governing class didn't just enjoy their privileges, they made them less visible on a daily basis. A laborer returning from a hard day's work wouldn't have to walk past the sprawling, luxurious compound of a high official, a sight that could easily stoke feelings of injustice and bitterness. His world was primarily his own neighborhood among people of similar means and status. This reduced the constant, in-your-face reminder of inequality, effectively sanding down the rough edges of class disparity. Furthermore, this zoning made the distribution of resources far more manageable and less provocative. The wider streets and better drainage in the elite quarter could be framed as a feature of that district's design, rather than a privilege explicitly denied to others. It allowed for a discrete inequality, one that was woven into the very geography of the city, and therefore felt less like a personal injustice and more like a natural, unchangeable order of things. The Romans would later perfect this concept, turning it into a fine art of urban management. In a city of over 1 million inhabitants like Rome, the potential for social friction was enormous. The architectural solution was a stark and clear residential hierarchy. At the top were the domus, the spacious, inward-looking private homes of the wealthy, built around beautiful atriums and peristyle gardens, their blank outer walls facing the noisy streets, creating a world of privacy and luxury hidden from public view. At the other end of the spectrum were the overwhelming majority of Romans who lived in insulae, literal islands or multi-story apartment blocks. These were often poorly built, cramped, and fire-prone, housing families in single rooms and crowding the lower-class districts. The genius of the Roman system was not just in the separation, but in the careful management of the spaces in between. While the classes lived apart, their lives were connected through a carefully controlled system of patronage that was reinforced by architecture. A wealthy patrician's domus would have a specific room near the entrance, the tablinum, where he would receive his clients, the poorer citizens who depended on him for food, money, or legal assistance. This ritual, the salutatio, was a daily reaffirmation of the social contract, but it happened on the elite's own turf, at his invitation. The client entered the luxurious world of the patron, received a benevolence, and then returned to his own insula. This architectural separation actually facilitated a controlled and ritualized interaction that reinforced hierarchy rather than challenging it. It prevented the kind of uncontrolled mixing that could lead to organized dissent, while still allowing for a necessary flow of resources and loyalty from the top down and support from the bottom up. By zoning their cities, ancient leaders understood a profound psychological truth. Sometimes the most effective way to keep the peace is to build walls that are not meant to keep invaders out, but to keep different ways of life comfortably and quietly apart. Of course, laws could be whispered in palace courtyards and decrees could be announced in the public squares, but words spoken on the wind are easily forgotten or deliberately misremembered. To create a truly lasting peace, ancient rulers realized they needed to make their authority permanent, unchangeable, and utterly undeniable. They found the perfect medium for this in the most durable canvas they could conceive, architecture itself. Across the ancient world, they began to carve their laws and their boasts directly into stone, turning entire buildings and monuments into a combination of public library, warning sign, and eternal propaganda machine. The most iconic example of this is the famed Code of Hammurabi, discovered not in a library archive, but erected proudly in a public space for all to see. This towering black diorite stele, standing over 7 feet tall, is a masterpiece of architectural messaging. At its summit, an intricate bas-relief depicts the Babylonian king Hammurabi standing humbly before Shamash, the god of justice. This visual is the hook. It immediately establishes the king's authority as divinely ordained, not something he invented himself. Then, covering the rest of the pillar, are row upon row of meticulously carved cuneiform script, detailing 282 laws that covered everything from property disputes and trade regulations to family law and assault. The public placement of this code was a revolutionary act of governance through architecture. By setting it in an open plaza, Hammurabi was making a powerful claim about transparency. The law was no longer a secret set of rules known only to priests and officials that could be arbitrarily applied. It was now out in the open for any literate citizen, or anyone who had a literate friend, to read and understand. This transparency was a tool for peace as it set clear, consistent expectations for everyone in society. A merchant would know the interest rate he could legally charge. A builder would know the severe penalty for constructing a house that collapsed and killed the owner. This clarity reduced misunderstandings and the potential for corrupt officials to twist the law for their own benefit. But the steel's imposing physical presence also served as a stark deterrent. The unyielding hardness of the diorite stone mirrored the unyielding nature of the punishments described within. The laws themselves are famously severe, operating on the principle of an eye for an eye, but their permanence was the true message. These were not temporary edicts, they were eternal principles carved into a material meant to outlast generations. To even contemplate breaking a law, a citizen would have to confront the sheer, immovable weight of the state's authority, literally set in stone right before their eyes. This strategy of inscribing power onto architecture extended far beyond legal codes. Egyptian pharaohs covered the walls of their temples and the bases of their obelisks with hieroglyphic accounts of their military victories and divine endorsements. The Behistun inscription in Persia, carved terrifyingly high on a cliff face, told the story of King Darius the Great's rise to power in 3 different languages, ensuring his version of events would be read by any passing trader or diplomat for centuries to come. These weren't just historical records, they were permanent, unchallengeable narratives designed to shape how future generations would perceive their rule. By embedding these stories into the landscape itself, these rulers were attempting to win the war of memory, making their preferred version of history the only one that could physically survive. The architecture became the message, a silent stone guardian of a legacy that was meant to command obedience and awe long after the ruler himself had turned to dust. It was the ultimate act of governance, using the very fabric of the city to whisper and sometimes shout the rules of civilization into the ears of eternity. Yet beyond the imposing stone of law and the rigid lines of zoning, ancient rulers understood that peace required more than just order and control. It needed moments of tranquility, spaces for the human spirit to breathe. After the noise of the forum and the press of the crowded streets, the mind and body craved respite. This profound insight led to one of the most beautiful and psychologically astute architectural innovations: the deliberate creation of gardens and green spaces as essential urban infrastructure for well-being. While the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon may be semi-mythical, their very story speaks to a deep-seated ancient desire to integrate nature's serenity into the heart of power and population. They were described as a breathtaking tiered mountain of lush vegetation, a man-made marvel of engineering with complex irrigation systems lifting water to great heights to nurture trees, vines, and flowers. Whether entirely real or embellished, the concept they represent is absolutely authentic. The idea that a ruler could demonstrate his greatness not just through conquest or temples, but by crafting a living, breathing paradise for his people to enjoy. This philosophy found its most perfected expression in the Persian tradition of the Paradisa, a term meaning walled garden that gives us our word paradise. These were not wild, untamed landscapes but meticulously designed geometric spaces, often divided into 4 quadrants by water channels representing the 4 rivers of life. Shaded walkways, fragrant fruit trees, blooming flowers, and the constant, calming sound of flowing water defined these enclosures. They were designed to engage all the senses, to be a complete sensory escape from the dust, heat, and clamor of the city outside their walls. For the Persian nobility and, in some cases, the public, these gardens were more than just pretty places. They were spiritual and philosophical retreats. They represented an idealized, ordered nature, a microcosm of a peaceful and harmonious universe that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic real world. Spending time in such an environment was believed to restore balance to the individual, to calm agitated minds, and to encourage refined contemplation and conversation. The governmental genius of investing in these green oases was multifaceted. On a purely practical level, they served as crucial cooling systems for dense urban centers. The extensive planting and water features could reduce the ambient temperature significantly, offering a refuge during the scorching summer months and mitigating the health risks associated with heat stress. This directly contributed to a more comfortable and therefore more content populace, but the greater impact was psychological and social. By providing these beautiful, shared spaces for leisure and relaxation, the state was effectively investing in the mental health of its citizenry. Chronic stress, overcrowding, and the constant minor frustrations of urban life are potent kindling for social conflict. A population that is perpetually on edge is far more likely to erupt into violence over a minor dispute. The garden, however, offered a sanctioned outlet for release. It was a place to walk, to sit quietly, to gather with family away from the pressures of work and home. This architectural provision of calm had a subtle but powerful effect on social harmony. In a shared space of beauty, where people from different walks of life might coincidentally cross paths while enjoying the shade of a cypress tree or the sight of a blooming rose, the usual social barriers could momentarily soften. The environment itself encouraged a more peaceful, contemplative state of mind, making hostile interactions less likely. It was harder to stay angry about a neighbor's loud donkey or a merchant's sharp practices when surrounded by such deliberate tranquility. The government, by building and maintaining these spaces, was sending a powerful message of care. It showed an understanding that governance wasn't just about enforcing laws and collecting taxes. It was about cultivating the conditions for a good life. This fostered a deep-seated sense of loyalty and goodwill toward the state that was far more effective than fear alone. The peaceful rustle of leaves in a royal garden could do more to quiet a restless heart than a dozen soldiers patrolling a street, proving that sometimes the most advanced tool for maintaining peace is simply the gift of a quiet moment under a green tree. Yet for all the tranquility offered by earthly gardens, ancient architects and rulers understood that the ultimate source of order and authority did not lie on the ground. It was written in the stars. Across continents and cultures, we find a breathtaking convergence, the deliberate, precise alignment of monumental architecture with the celestial ballet overhead. This was not a matter of primitive superstition. It was a sophisticated science of power, a way to literally build a connection between the king on earth and the cosmos itself, framing human governance as a mere reflection of a divine, universal plan. Consider the great Mayan city of Chichen Itza. Here, the magnificent stepped pyramid known as El Castillo is a masterwork of astronomical engineering. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, a mesmerizing play of light and shadow occurs. The angle of the setting sun casts a series of triangular shadows down the northern staircase, which merge with the stone serpent heads at the base to create the undulating illusion of a massive feathered serpent slithering down from the heavens to earth. This was the god Kukulkan, and this breathtaking phenomenon was a powerful annual reaffirmation of the ruler's divine connection. For the assembled populace, this was not an illusion, it was proof. It was the cosmos itself endorsing the authority of the man who claimed to speak for the gods, making his rule seem as inevitable and natural as the sun's journey across the sky. This architectural strategy of celestial anchoring was employed with equal brilliance in the Old World. The great stone circle of Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain in England stands as a timeless testament to this cosmic ambition. Its massive trilithons and carefully placed sarsen stones are arranged to frame key solar and lunar events. At the summer solstice, the rising sun aligns perfectly with the heel stone, casting its rays directly into the heart of the monument. While we may not know the names of the chieftains or priests who commanded its construction, the message encoded in its pillars is clear. The people who built this possessed profound knowledge. They could predict the turning of the seasons, the longest day, the shortest night. In a world dependent on agriculture and vulnerable to the elements, This knowledge was the ultimate power. The individual or group who could demonstrate this connection to the heavens held the key to survival itself. They could tell people when to plant, when to harvest, when to expect the rains. This ability transformed a leader from a mere warrior or elder into an essential interpreter of the universe's will, a role that commanded obedience not through force, but through awe and dependency. The psychological impact of this astro-architecture cannot be overstated. By embedding these celestial correlations into the most permanent structures they could build, early leaders were engaging in a form of psychological governance that was incredibly effective. They were creating a sense of predestined harmony. If the king's palace was aligned with the star that heralded the Nile's flood, how could one possibly challenge his authority without challenging the very order of nature? To rebel against such a ruler was not just treason, it was a form of cosmic blasphemy, an attempt to fight against the turning of the heavens themselves. This framing made dissent seem not only dangerous but fundamentally unnatural and futile. The architecture itself became a permanent argument for the status quo, its stones silently arguing that the social hierarchy was a direct and necessary mirror of the celestial hierarchy. This created a powerful, pervasive peace, a peace built on a widely accepted world, where everyone and everything had its ordained place, from the lowest farmer to the highest king, all under the watchful, predictable movements of the sun, moon, and stars. It was the most profound peacekeeping strategy ever devised, convincing people that the way things are is the way the universe itself intended them to be. Yet for all the profound peace promised by celestial alignments, ancient rulers still faced the gritty, everyday reality of human nature, our deep-seated appetite for competition, drama, and even violence. You cannot simply legislate or design away these primal instincts, so instead of trying to suppress them, the most ingenious governments of antiquity found a way to harness them, to redirect that raw energy into something spectacular, controllable, and ultimately stabilizing. This is where the architecture of mass entertainment enters the stage, not merely as a venue for leisure, but as a sophisticated social safety valve. The grand amphitheaters and stadiums of the ancient world were, in essence, shock absorbers for the soul of a city, engineered to transform chaotic aggression into cathartic, ritualized spectacle. Consider the majestic theater of Epidaurus in Greece, renowned even in the ancient world for its breathtaking acoustics and harmonious design. Carved into a hillside, its semicircular arrangement of limestone seats could hold over 14,000 people, all focused on the circular orchestra and the stage building behind it. But this was not just a place to watch a play. Attending a performance of a tragedy by Aeschylus or Sophocles was a communal, religious, and civic event. The plays themselves grappled with the biggest, most turbulent themes imaginable: fate, justice, betrayal, divine wrath, and the horrific consequences of hubris. The audience didn't just passively watch, they collectively experienced these powerful emotions, from the terror of Oedipus discovering his terrible fate to the rage of Medea. This shared catharsis, this purging of pity and fear, was a form of social therapy. It allowed citizens to safely explore the darkest corners of the human experience from the safety of their seats, emerging perhaps a little more reflective and emotionally settled. The architecture facilitated this by creating an intimate connection between performer and audience, ensuring every word of the poetic dialogue, which debated deep moral and political questions, was heard with crystal clarity. It was governance through collective emotional release, but the Romans took this concept to an entirely different level of scale and purpose with their iconic Colosseum. If the Greek theater was for philosophical catharsis, the Roman amphitheater was for visceral, overwhelming spectacle. The Flavian amphitheater, as it was originally known, was a freestanding marvel of Roman engineering, a massive oval of stone and concrete that could hold an estimated 50,000 to 80,000 spectators. Its design was a masterpiece of crowd control and sensory management. A vast awning system, the velarium, operated by a dedicated detachment of sailors from the Roman Navy, could be unfurled to shield the crowd from the sun. Elaborate underground passages and elevators, the hypogeum, allowed for the sudden, dramatic appearance of gladiators, wild animals, and elaborate stage sets onto the arena floor, creating a constant stream of surprise and awe. The seating arrangement was not random. It was a precise map of Roman society. The emperor and the Vestal virgins had the best views in their dedicated boxes, followed by senators, then equestrians, and so on down to the common citizens and slaves in the highest, furthest tiers. Just by taking your seat, you were visually reminded of your place in the social order. The events within were carefully choreographed narratives of power, justice, and Roman virtue. The morning might begin with venations, wild animal hunts featuring exotic beasts from the farthest reaches of the empire, lions from Africa, tigers from Persia, rhinos from India. This was not just entertainment, it was a vivid demonstration of Rome's imperial reach and its ability to conquer the wildest corners of the earth. Next might come the public execution of criminals, often dressed as mythical figures and forced to act out gruesome stories from mythology, a brutal form of moral storytelling that reinforced the consequences of defying Roman law. The main event, the gladiatorial combats, were the ultimate ritualization of violence. These were not mere brawls but highly regulated contests between trained professionals who followed strict rules and codes of conduct. The crowd's roar, the emperor's thumbs up or thumbs down. It was all part of a scripted drama where life and death decisions were made publicly, reinforcing the emperor's role as the ultimate arbiter of fate. The genius of this architectural and social institution was its ability to satisfy the population's most base desires within a framework entirely controlled by the state. The hunger for violence, excitement, and drama was sated, but it was sated in a specific time, at a specific place, and under the watchful eye of the emperor himself. This provided a crucial outlet for the frustrations, aggressions, and restless energy that could otherwise fuel political unrest or street riots. A population that spent its afternoon cheering in the Colosseum was far less likely to spend its evening rioting in the Forum. The games were also a powerful tool of propaganda and appeasement. Emperors famously provided free admission and sometimes even free food, panem et circenses, bread and circuses, as a way to cultivate public favor and distract from political problems or economic hardships. By giving the people what they wanted, the state maintained what it needed most: control and a tenuous, spectacular peace, proving that sometimes the most effective way to govern a crowd is to give it a grandstand and a glorious show. While grand spectacles in the amphitheater could distract the masses and celestial alignments could awe them into submission, no government, no matter how powerful, could long maintain peace with a hungry populace. The most fundamental, non-negotiable requirement for social stability has always been, quite simply, food. This is where ancient governance moved from the spectacular to the profoundly practical, and where architecture became not a symbol of power, but a literal life support system. The silent, unassuming heroes of this story are the granaries and warehouses, the vast, meticulously designed storage facilities that allowed civilizations to defy the seasons and outlast disaster. In ancient Egypt, the rhythm of life was dictated by the Nile's annual flood. A bountiful inundation meant surplus grain. A weak one spelled famine, panic, and almost certain rebellion. The Egyptian state's response was one of history's most effective administrative and architectural innovations, the national granary system. These were not just simple mud brick silos, they were extensive complexes, often attached to temples or royal estates, featuring rows of large, cylindrical bins made of plastered brick, designed to be cool, dry, and secure from pests. The biblical story of Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dream and advising him to store grain during 7 years of plenty is a perfect allegory for this very real practice. Scribes kept meticulous records on papyrus of the grain entering and leaving these state granaries, treating the food supply with the same gravity as the treasury's gold. The architectural genius of these structures was in their passive climate control. Their thick walls and elevated foundations protected the precious grain from the searing heat and humidity that would otherwise cause it to spoil or become infested with weevils. This wasn't just about building a big box, it was about understanding the science of preservation on a massive scale. The design ensured that the surplus harvested in a good year could be kept edible for years, creating a crucial buffer against catastrophe. When the inevitable lean year arrived, the state could then perform its most vital function, the fair distribution of this stored grain. This is where storage architecture transformed directly into a tool for peacekeeping. A government that could reliably put food in the hands of its starving citizens during a famine was a government that earned profound, unwavering loyalty. Conversely, a government that was seen to be hoarding grain for the elite while the masses starved was a government begging for a violent uprising. The granary, therefore, became the ultimate symbol of a ruler's benevolence and competence. It was a tangible, physical promise, a guarantee that the state was actively working to ensure its people's survival. This built a foundation of trust that was far more resilient than any wall. This principle of storage as social stabilizer reached its zenith in the Indus Valley civilization. At Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists have uncovered a massive, elevated brick structure near the city's center, featuring a complex network of ventilation ducts and a raised platform divided into orderly compartments. This is widely identified as a central public granary. Its strategic location is critically important, placing this essential food reserve in the heart of the city, rather than hidden away in a secluded royal compound, sent a powerful, unifying message to every citizen. This bounty belongs to all of us, and it is protected for our collective good. The sophisticated ventilation system was an architectural marvel designed to create a constant flow of air through the stored grain, preventing the buildup of moisture and heat that would lead to rot and mold. This wasn't just a warehouse, it was a life-preserving machine, a testament to a government that understood its most critical role was not conquest but custodianship. The economic stability provided by these architectural wonders cannot be overstated. By safeguarding surplus, the state could regulate grain prices, preventing wild fluctuations that could bankrupt farmers one season and starve city dwellers the next. It could provision armies on long campaigns without resorting to the desperate and deeply unpopular measure of seizing food from local farmers. It could also support large-scale public works projects by feeding the laborers, enabling the construction of the very temples, walls, and roads that further strengthened the state. This created a virtuous cycle of investment and stability. The trust generated by the reliable granary system encouraged greater agricultural production, as farmers felt confident that their surplus would be purchased and stored rather than wasted. This larger surplus, in turn, allowed the state to build an even greater buffer, making the entire civilization more resilient. The granary was more than just a building. It was the beating heart of the ancient social contract, a physical manifestation of the deal between the governed and their governors. We will contribute our labor and our taxes, and you, in return, will architecturally guarantee our survival against the unpredictable wrath of nature. In the quiet, cool darkness of these storage facilities lay the true secret to lasting peace, not the fear of the sword, but the security of the next meal. But while granaries secured the internal peace of a city, the true ambition of an empire is to weave its far-flung territories into a single, cohesive whole. This is where ancient engineering achieved its most breathtaking and transformative scale, reaching out across mountains, valleys, and rivers to stitch the landscape itself into the fabric of the state. The Roman Empire, in particular, mastered this art of connection, and their greatest tools were not just legions and laws, but the breathtakingly elegant arcs of their bridges and aqueducts. These were not mere feats of engineering. They were the very sinews of the empire, physical manifestations of a central authority that could literally move mountains and command water to defy gravity for the sake of unity. A Roman aqueduct was a staggering declaration of intent. Imagine a river of fresh, clean water flowing not downhill, but across a valley on a towering, multi-tiered arcade of stone arches, arriving in a distant city with the same steady, life-giving force as it had at its mountain source. The Pont du Gard in southern France stands as a perfect example, a three-tiered masterpiece of precision-cut stone that carried water for 31 miles to the bustling city of Nimes. Its construction required an unimaginable depth of topographic understanding, surveying skill, and logistical coordination, all directed from the heart of the empire. The impact of such a structure on a newly conquered territory was profound and immediate. For a local tribe accustomed to drawing water from a muddy river or a scarce well, the sudden, reliable arrival of clean, fresh water from a monumental stone channel was nothing short of miraculous. It was a tangible, daily benefit of Roman rule, a clear demonstration that submission to the empire came with direct, practical improvements to quality of life. This wasn't just propaganda, it was liquid persuasion flowing directly into the public fountains and baths. It fostered a sense of shared identity and dependency. A citizen in far-off Spain or North Africa could drink water delivered by the same engineering genius that supplied the city of Rome itself, creating a physical and psychological link to the imperial core. This reduced the sense of being an isolated, neglected outpost and cultivated a powerful loyalty to the system that provided such wonders. Furthermore, by ensuring a clean water supply to garrison towns and new colonies, the state safeguarded the health of its soldiers and settlers, preventing the disease outbreaks that could cripple a military occupation and spark unrest among a local population resentful of sick soldiers in their midst. Just as the aqueducts unified the empire through shared resources, the vast network of Roman roads and bridges unified it through movement and communication. The famous Appian Way, begun in 312 BC, was the first of these great highways, but it was merely the prototype for a system that would eventually stretch over 250,000 miles across 3 continents. These roads were engineering marvels in their own right, built with deep foundations, layered drainage, and surfaces of fitted stone that could withstand centuries of use. But their true power was unleashed when they spanned obstacles. The mighty bridges that carried these roads across Europe's rivers, like the magnificent Alcantara Bridge in Spain, which still stands today, were more than conveniences, they were strategic masterstrokes. Before their construction, a river like the Tagus or the Rhine was a formidable barrier dividing peoples, slowing armies to a crawl, and allowing regional differences and rivalries to fester in isolation. A bridge transformed that barrier into a conduit. This transformation had a direct and powerful effect on reducing conflict. First, it allowed for the incredibly rapid deployment of troops. A legion stationed in Gaul could now march to quell a rebellion in Germany in a fraction of the time it would have taken before, making the empire's military response swift and decisive. This rapid reaction capability was a powerful deterrent to would-be rebels or invaders who could no longer rely on geographic distance for protection. Second, these bridges became the arteries of trade. Goods, ideas, and people could now flow across previously insurmountable divides. A merchant from Britain could relatively easily transport tin to markets in Italy, while a craftsman from Greece could bring his skills to a new province. This economic interdependence created a powerful incentive for peace. Why raid your neighbor across the river when you have a thriving trade relationship with him? Conflict became bad for business, and the entire interconnected network had a shared interest in maintaining stability for the sake of prosperity. Finally, these physical connections facilitated the slow, steady process of cultural exchange and assimilation that was the true secret to Rome's longevity. As people traveled, they shared languages, customs, and religious beliefs. A local deity might be merged with a Roman one, creating a new, hybrid faith that fostered a sense of shared identity. The bridge and the road did not just move legions and carts, they moved cultures, slowly weaving a tapestry of diverse peoples into a single, if complex, Roman world. By turning geographic barriers into avenues of exchange, these architectural marvels did more than any law or decree could to build the lasting peace of a truly unified empire. But if bridges and aqueducts connected the living across vast distances, ancient societies also invested extraordinary resources in building profound, permanent connections to those who had come before. The architecture of death was never merely about disposal of the body. It was a powerful tool for binding the present to the past, using the veneration of ancestors as a bedrock for social stability. In ancient Egypt, this philosophy found its earliest expression in the mastaba, a low, rectangular tomb with sloping sides made of mud brick. These were not the grand pyramids of later pharaohs, but the eternal homes of the elite officials and nobles who formed the crucial administrative class. The mastaba's design was meticulously functional for the afterlife, featuring a sealed burial chamber deep underground for the body and an above-ground chapel where family members and priests could perform ongoing offerings. This architectural division was critical. It created a dedicated, sacred space for the living to interact with the dead, to bring food, recite prayers, and reaffirm the family's lineage and status. The walls of these chapels were often covered in vivid reliefs depicting the deceased's life, his titles, his wealth, and his service to the pharaoh. This was more than biography. It was a permanent public record of his right to rule, etched in stone for all eternity. By investing in such a structure, a noble family wasn't just honoring their patriarch. They were architecturally cementing their own privileged position in the social hierarchy for generations to come. The tomb became a title deed to power, a physical anchor that prevented a sudden shift in the social order after a prominent figure's death. This concept of the tomb as a social stabilizer evolved into even more impressive forms with the Mycenaean civilization of Bronze Age Greece. Here, the ruling warrior kings constructed magnificent beehive-shaped tombs known as tholoi. The most famous, the so-called treasury of Atreus at Mycenae, is a breathtaking example of corbelled vault architecture. A long, dramatic passageway called a dromos leads to an enormous, soaring circular chamber topped by a towering dome, all built from massive, precisely cut stone blocks. The engineering was a statement of raw, indomitable power, but the experience of approaching and entering the tomb was carefully choreographed for psychological impact. Walking down the enclosed ceremonial dromos, one's view is focused solely on the imposing stone doorway ahead. building a sense of anticipation and reverence. Entering the vast, dark, and echoing chamber, a visitor would feel dwarfed by the scale, overwhelmed by the sheer effort and resources required to build it. This was the intended effect. The tomb was designed to inspire awe and fear, to communicate the unimaginable power and divine right of the dynasty buried within. The social function of these monumental tombs was profound. They served as powerful territorial markers, physically asserting a royal family's claim to the land and its people. The bones of the revered ancestors were literally buried in the heart of the kingdom, their spirits believed to watch over and protect their descendants. This created a powerful narrative of continuity. The current king wasn't just a ruler, he was the latest link in an unbroken chain of powerful leaders stretching back into the mythical past. To challenge his authority was not just to challenge a man, but to disrespect the entire lineage and risk angering the ancestral spirits who ensured the kingdom's prosperity and safety. This architectural connection to the past actively discouraged disruptive change or rebellion. It framed the existing social order not as a temporary arrangement, but as a sacred, eternal tradition. The government, by sponsoring or allowing these grand burial complexes, was effectively building a coalition with the dead to legitimize the power of the living. The massive, unmovable stones of the Tholos tomb were the ultimate argument against revolution, a silent, overwhelming reminder that the way things are is the way they have always been meant to be, watched over by generations of mighty kings sleeping within their eternal, architecturally enforced slumber. But beyond the visual spectacle of stone and the choreographed rituals of power, ancient architects discovered an even more subtle and pervasive medium for control, the very air itself. They learned to shape sound, to bend acoustics to their will, turning the spoken word into an instrument of unparalleled authority. This was not a minor architectural detail. It was a sophisticated science of amplification that transformed how leaders connected with and commanded their people. The theater of Epidaurus in Greece stands as the undisputed masterpiece of this ancient art. Nestled in the Peloponnese, this 4th century BC structure is renowned even today for its near-miraculous acoustics. A performer standing on the stage, the orchestra, can speak in a calm, conversational tone, not a shout, and be heard with perfect clarity by a spectator sitting in the very highest of the 55 rows of seats over 100 feet away. For centuries, this was attributed to myth or mystery, but modern research has revealed the breathtakingly intentional design behind the phenomenon. The secret lies in the precise geometry and materials of the theater. The semicircular arrangement of the limestone seats acts as a massive filter, absorbing the low-frequency rumble of the crowd, the distracting murmurs and shuffling feet, while simultaneously reflecting the higher frequencies of the human voice back upward. The stepped rows of seats create a series of perfect acoustic diffraction gratings, catching the sound waves and channeling them upward. Even the material itself is key. The porous limestone of the benches prevents sound from reflecting too harshly, eliminating the echo that would muddy a speaker's words in a modern concrete stadium. Every element was calculated to serve the human voice. This was not an accident. It was acoustic engineering of the highest order, designed to ensure that every nuance of a tragic hero's lament or a political orator's persuasive argument would land with maximum impact on every single member of the audience. The implications for governance were profound. In a world without microphones, megaphones, or any form of electronic amplification, the ability to address thousands of citizens simultaneously and intelligibly was a superpower. It transformed a political speech from a distant, frustrating event where only those in the front rows could hear, into an immersive, shared experience for the entire community. A leader could explain a complex new law, respond to a public grievance, or rally the population for war without his message being lost, distorted, or drowned out by the crowd. This clarity was a powerful tool for preventing the misunderstandings and rumors that so often fuel civil discord and conflict. When a population hears a policy explained directly from the mouth of its leader, in his own words and tone, it eliminates the dangerous game of telephone where messages are warped as they pass through multiple intermediaries. The architecture itself ensured the message remained pure and direct. This control over sound extended beyond the political sphere into the sacred. In the vast, column-filled hypostyle halls of Egyptian temples like Karnak, priests understood how to use the environment to enhance their divine authority. The stone pillars and high, echoing ceilings could be used to create resonant, otherworldly effects during rituals. The chants and invocations of the priests, amplified and distorted by the architecture, would have sounded less human and more divine, as if the gods themselves were speaking through the stone. This sonic manipulation heightened the spiritual experience, making the religious doctrine being presented feel more authentic and awe-inspiring. It solidified the temple's role as the sole conduit to the gods, and by extension, reinforced the power of the pharaoh, the chief priest. In this way, sound became an invisible architecture of control. It built walls of shared understanding and ceilings of collective experience, using the physics of vibration to unify thousands of individuals into a single, attentive audience, all listening to the same unwavering message of power, purpose, and divine order. Now consider the power of a threshold the moment you step from one realm into another. A transition that ancient architects understood could be managed, controlled, and loaded with meaning. Across the ancient world, gateways were far more than simple openings in a wall. They were potent psychological and political instruments designed to choreograph the experience of transition itself. The magnificent Ishtar Gate of Babylon, built by King Nebuchadnezzar II around 575 BC, stands as perhaps the most stunning example. This was not a mere defensive entry point. It was a breathtaking ceremonial passage, covered in lapis lazuli blue-glazed bricks and adorned with over 570 reliefs of dragons and bulls, the sacred animals of the gods Marduk and Adad. To pass through this gate was to be immersed in a world of overwhelming color and divine symbolism. The processional way leading to it was lined with walls featuring 120 glazed brick lions, marching in a silent, powerful parade. The message to any visitor, whether a returning citizen, a foreign diplomat, or a conquered tribute bearer, was unequivocal. You are now entering a space of unparalleled power, wealth, and divine favor. The very act of walking through this gateway was a ritual of submission and awe, psychologically preparing the individual to accept the authority of the king and the gods who ruled from within. The Romans, masters of practical symbolism, took this concept and applied it with their characteristic legal precision through the triumphal arch. These free-standing monuments, like the Arch of Titus or the Arch of Constantine, were not gates in a wall but symbolic thresholds erected across important roads and forums. They commemorated specific military victories and the emperors who won them, but their function was deeply psychological. A Roman general granted the honor of a triumph, a massive victory parade through the heart of the city, would ritually pass under such an arch. This was a transformative ceremony. On one side of the arch, he was a successful military commander. On the other, he was a divinely sanctioned hero, almost god-like in his glory. For the everyday citizen constantly passing under these arches in the course of their daily business, the effect was more subtle but just as powerful. The arches served as permanent stone reminders of the empire's relentless expansion and invincibility. They framed the movement of people, constantly reinforcing the narrative of Roman power and the benefits of Pax Romana, the Roman peace that this military might was said to guarantee. They marked the transition into spaces of law, commerce, and power, subtly conditioning the populace to associate those spaces with the strength and legitimacy of the state that built them. Beyond these monumental examples, the humble city gate played a more mundane but equally vital role in maintaining daily order and security. In any walled city, from Jerusalem to ancient Chinese capitals like Chang'an, the gate was the primary choke point for all movement in and out. This made it the perfect architectural tool for regulation. Here, officials could monitor the flow of people and goods, levying taxes on merchandise, checking for contraband, and identifying potential threats. The gate was a natural bottleneck where the state could exert its authority efficiently. Guards stationed at the gate were not just soldiers, they were customs agents, tax collectors, and police officers rolled into one. This controlled access was fundamental to internal peace. It prevented the unchecked influx of weapons that could fuel rebellion, the spread of epidemic diseases through the quarantine of sick travelers, and the economic instability of untaxed black market goods undercutting local merchants. The slow, often frustrating process of entering a city at the gate also had a psychological effect. It created a clear distinction between the chaotic, unpredictable outside world, the realm of bandits, wild animals, and enemy armies, and the ordered, safe, and governed space within the walls. By the time a person finally passed through the gate, they were psychologically ready to accept the rules and restrictions of city life, having just experienced the alternative. The gateway, in all its forms, was the ultimate architectural checkpoint. It didn't just control who or what entered a space, it controlled the very mindset of those crossing the threshold, ensuring that every transition reinforced the prevailing power structure and contributed to the fragile, carefully managed peace of the ancient world. While grand gateways controlled the movement of people and grand spectacles channeled their emotions, ancient rulers also mastered a far more intimate form of control, the very temperature of the air their citizens breathed. In an era without electricity, the struggle against extreme heat and cold was a constant, draining battle that could fray tempers, undermine health, and fuel deep-seated resentment. The most forward-thinking civilizations understood that by architecturally winning this battle, they could earn a level of public loyalty that no amount of force or propaganda could ever achieve. The Romans, in their relentless pursuit of engineering excellence, developed one of the most remarkable solutions to this challenge, the hypocaust system. This was essentially the ancient world's version of central heating, a technology so effective it would not be matched again in Europe for over 1,000 years after the empire's fall. At its heart was a simple but brilliant principle. A furnace, stoked by slaves or attendants, would generate hot air and gases. Instead of letting this energy escape, the system channeled it through a hollow space beneath the raised floor of a room, which was supported by countless small brick pillars called pili. The heat would then rise through the floor tiles, warming the entire space evenly and comfortably. But the genius didn't stop at the floor. The hot air was also directed through terracotta pipes embedded within the walls, creating a radiant warmth that permeated the entire structure from the ground up. The most celebrated public application of this technology was in the vast Roman bath complexes, or thermae. These were not merely places to get clean. They were the social and recreational centers of Roman life, and their operation was a monumental civic undertaking. Entering the baths, a citizen would progress through a series of rooms with carefully calibrated temperatures: the cool frigidarium, the warm tepidarium, and the hot coldarium, each heated to perfection by the hypocaust system beneath. The experience was one of profound, state-provided comfort. In the depths of winter, a Roman could leave his chilly, damp apartment and find refuge in a space where the marble was warm to the touch and the air was blissfully heated. This was a powerful, tangible benefit of Roman citizenship. The government, by funding and maintaining these lavish public works, was demonstrating a paternalistic care for the physical well-being of its people. It showed an understanding that a comfortable populace is a contented one. The physiological impact is undeniable. Escaping the harsh cold reduces stress, improves circulation, and lessens the risk of respiratory illness. But the psychological and political impact was even greater. It fostered a sense of shared privilege and communal luxury, building a powerful bond of gratitude and loyalty between the citizen and the state that provided such a marvelous escape from daily hardship. Meanwhile, in the scorching arid climates of the Persian Empire, architects were solving the same problem of environmental comfort from the opposite direction. Their masterpiece of passive cooling was the wind catcher or bagier. This ingenious structure is a testament to a deep understanding of physics and airflow. A wind catcher is essentially a tall, chimney-like tower cap open on one or more sides, positioned high above a building to catch the prevailing wind. But its true magic lies in its dual function. As the wind is caught and funneled down the tower into the living spaces below, it creates a refreshing breeze. However, the system often worked in tandem with an canat or underground water canal. The air, before entering the main room, might be drawn over the cool surface of the water in the canat or a small indoor pool. This would chill the air through evaporation, effectively transforming the wind catcher into a primitive but highly effective air conditioning unit. In some designs, the wind catcher could also function as a solar chimney. On a still, hot day, the sun would heat the air inside the tower, causing it to rise and draw cooler air from the basement or underground rooms up through the building, creating a constant, passive circulation that flushed out stale, hot air. This architectural ingenuity was not reserved for the palaces of shahs alone. Sophisticated examples of wind catchers can be found on public buildings, caravanserais that sheltered traveling merchants, and even more modest urban homes. This widespread application points to a societal value placed on communal comfort. A government that encouraged or facilitated such architectural wisdom was implicitly investing in the productivity and health of its entire population. The ability to work, rest, and sleep in a cool environment during a blistering summer heatwave is not a trivial luxury. It is a matter of survival and dignity. It reduces heat exhaustion, allows for proper sleep, and makes the daily routine bearable. By promoting designs that achieved this naturally without costly fuel, the state was preemptively addressing a major source of social friction. The stifling, oppressive heat that can make people short-tempered and prone to conflict was architecturally mitigated. The wind catcher, silently turning in the wind, was more than a cooling device. It was a subtle peacekeeping technology, ensuring that the pressures of the environment did not become the pressures that tore the social fabric apart. Both the Roman hypocaust and the Persian wind catcher reveal a profound truth of ancient governance, that the path to a population's loyalty often lies through the most fundamental of human needs, the simple, profound desire to be comfortable in one's own skin and one's own home. While the hypocaust and wind catcher addressed the comfort of the body, an even more fundamental threat to social order festered in the shadows of every dense urban settlement, the invisible menace of waste and disease. For an ancient city, the greatest danger was often not an invading army at the gates, but a silent, creeping enemy within the outbreak of a plague born from its own filth. This is where architectural planning made its most vital, life-saving contribution to peace. transforming public health from an afterthought into a cornerstone of governance. The Indus Valley civilization, flourishing over 4,000 years ago, presents what might be history's first and most comprehensive example of this principle in action. In their great metropolis of Mohenjo-Daro, the most striking feature isn't a grand palace or a towering temple, but something far more revolutionary lying beneath the streets, a meticulously planned, city-wide sanitation network that would not be matched in Europe for millennia. Every single house, from the most spacious courtyard residence to the humblest dwelling, was equipped with a dedicated bathroom and a toilet that emptied into a carefully laid ceramic waste pipe. These pipes from individual homes then connected to a main public drain running beneath the center of the wide, grid-patterned streets. These drains were marvels of practical engineering, constructed from precisely fitted bricks, covered with stone slabs to contain odor and prevent accidents, and designed with a subtle gradient to ensure everything flowed steadily away from the living spaces. They even featured manholes at regular intervals for maintenance and cleaning, a testament to a society that was not just building for the moment, but planning for the long-term health of its city. The impact of this architectural foresight on social stability cannot be overstated. In an era where most of the world's population lived with their own waste literally at their doorstep, the people of Mohenjo-Daro enjoyed a level of cleanliness that directly safeguarded their survival. The most devastating killers in the ancient world, cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and other waterborne pathogens, thrive in environments where human waste contaminates drinking water sources. By architecturally separating waste from water, the city's planners created a powerful barrier against these invisible enemies. A population spared from constant, debilitating illness is a population that can work, trade, and raise families effectively. It is a society not constantly on the brink of a health crisis that can quickly spiral into a social one. When a plague strikes, it doesn't just kill, it breeds panic, suspicion, and a complete breakdown of trust in authority. People look for scapegoats, often minority groups or incompetent leaders, and the social contract shatters. The advanced drainage of the Indus Valley was a preemptive strike against this chaos. It was the government, through its urban planners, demonstrating a profound, practical care for its citizens' most basic well-being. This built a foundation of trust and gratitude that was far more effective at maintaining order than any number of soldiers patrolling the streets. A healthy citizen is a content citizen, and a content citizen is far less likely to rebel. Centuries later and continents away, the Romans would famously build upon this same principle with their own monumental infrastructure, the Cloaca Maxima. Beginning as an open channel to drain the swampy waters between Rome's hills and evolving into a massive, covered sewer system, the Great Sewer became the symbolic bowels of the empire. It was so robustly built that parts of it are still in use today. The Romans complemented this with their magnificent aqueducts, which delivered fresh, clean water to public fountains, bathhouses, and even the private homes of the wealthy. This created a deliberate architectural separation of the clean and the unclean, the aqua and the cloaca. The constant flow of fresh water into the city and the efficient flow of waste out of it became the hydraulic heartbeat of Roman urban life. The public baths, like the magnificent baths of Caracalla, were not just about luxury, they were a state-sponsored public health initiative. By providing facilities for millions of citizens to wash regularly, the government was actively combating the lice, fleas, and bacteria that spread disease. This investment in public hygiene was a brilliant peacekeeping strategy. It directly addressed the squalor and overcrowding that defined life in the vast insulae or apartment blocks where most Romans lived. By offering an alternative to the filth of their homes, the state gave people an outlet, a place to feel clean, healthy, and human again. This act of providing for basic dignity mitigated the resentment that such stark urban inequality could easily foster. A person who can bathe in a magnificent complex, socialize with neighbors, and drink clean water from a public fountain is receiving a tangible benefit from the system, making them more likely to accept its other imperfections. The architecture of sanitation was therefore a critical tool for social cohesion, proving that a government that actively keeps its city clean is a government that actively keeps its city calm. And just as the flow of water and waste was managed beneath the streets for public health, the movement of people above ground was also carefully choreographed for a different kind of societal benefit, the cultivation of shared identity and collective purpose. This was the genius behind the ceremonial pathway, an architectural form that transformed simple movement into powerful ritual. In ancient Rome, the Via Sacra, or Sacred Way, was far more than just the oldest and most important street in the city. It was the meticulously designed stage upon which the drama of Roman state religion and imperial power unfolded. This route, winding through the heart of the Roman Forum from the Capitoline Hill to the Colosseum, was not a path for everyday errands. Its very pavement was considered hallowed ground, the traditional route for the most important public ceremonies, most notably the magnificent Roman triumph. Imagine the spectacle. A conquering general, hailed as imperator, would parade along this sacred avenue in a four-horse chariot, his face painted red like the statue of Jupiter. Behind him marched his legions, displaying the staggering spoils of war chests overflowing with gold and silver, captured enemy weapons, and lines of humiliated prisoners. The air would be thick with the smell of incense from altars, and the roar of the adoring crowds packed into the surrounding forums and balconies. The architectural design of the route was critical to the impact of this ritual. The Via Sacra was not a straight, efficient path. It meandered purposefully, ensuring the procession passed by the most significant temples, basilicas, and monuments of the Roman state. The triumphant general would be visually framed by the Temple of Saturn, which housed the state treasury, the Senate house where the empire's laws were made, and the Grand Basilica Julia, a center of law and commerce. This architectural choreography was a deliberate narrative device. It physically connected the general's military victory to the religious, political, and economic institutions of Rome. The message was unmistakable. This individual's success is not his alone. It is a victory for the entire Roman system, blessed by the gods and enriching the state. For the citizens lining the route, the experience was immersive and overwhelming. They weren't just watching a parade. They were participants in a collective celebration of Roman identity and superiority. The shared sensory experience, the sights, the sounds, the collective cheering forged powerful emotional bonds among the populace, creating a unified memory that transcended social class or political faction. In a vast and diverse empire often fraught with internal tensions, these processions were a vital tool for reinforcing a common identity as Romans, all sharing in the glory of the state. This concept of the processional way as a tool for unity was perfected in a very different context in ancient Egypt, particularly in the city of Thebes, modern-day Luxor. Here, the focus was not on military triumph but on divine connection. The most spectacular example was the annual Opet festival, a key event in the Egyptian religious calendar. During this festival, the cult statues of the gods Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were ceremonially moved from their home at the Karnak temple complex to the Luxor temple, about 2 miles to the south. They did not travel by a mundane road, but along a grand, purpose-built avenue known as the Sacred Way, which was lined on both sides for its entire length with hundreds of stone sphinxes, mythical creatures with the body of a lion and the head of a ram, a symbol of Ammon. This architectural framing was profound. The sphinxes acted as a silent stone honor guard, creating a sacred corridor that physically separated the divine procession from the mundane world. The pathway itself was a liminal space, a bridge between the human and the divine. The procession was a massive civic and religious event. Priests carried the heavy divine barks on their shoulders, followed by musicians, dancers, and a vast portion of the Theban population. The architecture of the route ensured that this movement was a shared, communal experience that reinforced the social and cosmic order. The journey culminated at the Luxor Temple, which was not just another temple but a place deeply associated with the royal Ka, the divine spirit of kingship. By architecturally linking Karnak, the home of the state god Ammon, to Luxor, the home of the divine king, the sacred way physically manifested the crucial relationship between pharaonic power and divine will. The people, by lining the avenue and participating in the festivities, were not mere spectators. They were bearing witness to the renewal of this covenant between the god and the ruler, a renewal that promised stability, abundant Nile floods, and prosperity for the coming year. This choreographed movement along a sacred path alleviated social anxieties and reinforced the legitimacy of the pharaoh's rule, directly reducing the potential for dissent or factionalism by tying everyone's well-being to the successful performance of the state-sponsored ritual. The ceremonial pathway, whether in Rome or Thebes, proved that by architecturally guiding the feet of the populace, a ruler could also guide their hearts and minds toward a shared sense of belonging and a collective investment in the stability of the realm. But for all the peaceful processions and public health initiatives, ancient rulers could never afford to forget the brutal reality of warfare. A city's beautiful temples, efficient sewers, and harmonious processional ways would all be for nothing if an enemy army could simply scale the walls and put everything to the torch. This constant threat gave rise to perhaps the most pragmatic and hard-nosed form of architectural peacekeeping, the defensively planned city, a settlement engineered from the ground up not just to deter attack, but to survive it, and in doing so, to prevent the internal panic and chaos that could be just as destructive as any external foe. These were not cities that simply grew and then added walls as an afterthought. These were urban fortresses where every street, every gate, and every building was a calculated component in a vast, life-preserving machine. The ancient Phoenician city of Carthage, a formidable maritime power and Rome's greatest rival, was a masterclass in this layered defensive approach. Perched on an easily defensible peninsula in North Africa, its primary defense was a massive 23-mile-long circuit of walls that were a legend in their own time. Ancient historians like Appian describe these fortifications as truly awe-inspiring, soaring over 13 meters high and nearly 10 meters thick, with a lower level that housed stables for 300 elephants, 4,000 horses, and barracks for 24,000 soldiers. This integration of defensive structure and logistical support was brilliant. The city's military muscle was built directly into its protective shell. Yet the true genius of Carthage's design lay in its concentric redundancy. Behind the main walls stood a mighty citadel, the Biasa Hill, a final redoubt that was itself a fortified urban center with its own walls, temples, and public buildings. This created a devastating dilemma for any attacker. Even if an enemy breached the seemingly impregnable outer walls through sheer numbers or ingenuity, they would not find themselves in a defenseless city. Instead, they would be funneled into the narrow, winding streets between the outer wall and the citadel, a deadly kill zone where the city's defenders could rain down projectiles from the higher ground of the Biasa. The urban plan itself became a weapon, turning the attacker's advance into a suicidal slog. This design was as much about managing internal strife as external assault. In the event of a rebellion or civil disturbance within the city, the garrison could retreat to the fortified Biasa, sealing it off from the rest of the urban area and containing the unrest until reinforcements could arrive or negotiations could take place. The architecture provided the state with options, a way to manage a crisis in stages without an immediate and total collapse of order. This philosophy of layered, intelligent defense found a parallel echo on the other side of the world in the ancient Chinese capital cities, particularly during periods of intense warfare like the era of the Warring States. Cities like Lindsay, the capital of the Kai state, were renowned for their sophisticated defensive layouts. They often employed a system of concentric walls, not unlike Carthage, but with an added emphasis on psychological warfare and misdirection. The main gates were not simple openings but complex, labyrinthine structures. An attacker who managed to break through the outer gate would not find himself on a city street, but in a large, enclosed courtyard surrounded by high walls, a death trap where he would be completely exposed to defenders on all sides. To proceed, he would then have to force his way through a second inner gate, which was often deliberately offset from the first, forcing troops to slow down and bunch up into a vulnerable mass under a hail of arrows and boiling oil. This architectural trickery was designed to shatter morale as much as to kill soldiers, making the cost of every inch of progress unbearably high. Perhaps the most critical feature of these defensively minded cities was the conscious inclusion of internal resources. The goal was to make the city a self-sustaining island that could withstand a prolonged siege without the population starving or turning on itself. This meant that urban planners dedicated vast tracts of precious inner city land not to housing or markets, but to agriculture. Within the massive walls of cities like those of the Han Dynasty, there were extensive fields for growing grain and vegetables, as well as deep, protected wells and sophisticated cisterns to ensure a continuous water supply even if the outer aqueducts were cut. The government granaries we discussed earlier were always placed in the most defensible part of the city, both to protect this vital resource from being captured by the enemy and to prevent it from being seized by a desperate, rioting populace from within. This foresight was the ultimate key to maintaining internal peace during a crisis. A besieged city where food and water run out in a week is a city doomed to descend into cannibalism and civil war, with citizens turning on each other long before the enemy breaks down the gates. But a city that can feed itself for months or even years projects an aura of invincibility. It demoralizes the attacking force, who watch in frustration as life inside the walls continues with a semblance of normalcy, and it gives the defending government the one thing it needs most: time. Time for a relief army to arrive, time for the enemy's supplies to dwindle, or time for diplomacy to work. The very architecture of the city, its walls, its gates, its internal fields became a literal framework for resilience, a physical embodiment of the state's commitment to protect its people from the ultimate chaos of war, thereby ensuring that even in the darkest of times, a fragile peace could be maintained within the only world that mattered, the world inside the walls. But beyond the high walls and secure granaries that protected a city from siege and starvation, ancient governments cultivated a far more dynamic form of peace, one built not on isolation, but on vibrant, profitable connection. This brings us to the bustling, fragrant, and incredibly noisy heart of the ancient city, the marketplace. Yet these were not the chaotic, spontaneous bazaars one might imagine. They were carefully architected instruments of economic and social policy, designed by rulers who understood that prosperity was the most powerful antidote to conflict. The Greek Stoa offers a perfect example of this intentional design. This was not merely a covered walkway. It was a multifunctional civic building that elegantly merged commerce, politics, and social life. Imagine a long, open colonnade, its roof supported by a graceful row of columns, providing shelter from the sun and rain. One side would be a solid wall, often adorned with elaborate paintings or official notices, while the open side faced onto a public square or main street. Within this sheltered, dignified space, merchants would set up their permanent stalls, creating a regulated and orderly environment for trade. The Stoa of Atollos in Athens, a magnificent two-story structure gifted by a king of Pergamon, exemplifies this. Its design provided a uniform, dignified space for dozens of merchants to operate side by side. The architectural message was one of stability and fairness. Every seller had a designated, equal place under the same roof, literally creating a level playing field. This structured environment reduced the petty squabbles over prime selling spots that could erupt in an open-air market, and the very permanence of the stone building signaled that commerce here was a protected, official activity of the city-state. The Stoa's design also fostered something crucial: trust. The transactions occurred in a public, well-trafficked, and officially sanctioned space, making it harder for a merchant to consistently cheat customers or for a buyer to cause trouble without witnesses. This architectural framework turned the volatile act of trade into a predictable, governable process, weaving the daily exchange of goods into the stable fabric of civic life. On the other side of the world, the Aztecs of Mesoamerica developed their own breathtakingly efficient version of the engineered marketplace, the changuis. Unlike the permanent stone stoa, the changuis was a massive, cyclical open-air market that would spring to life in designated city plazas on specific days of the ritual calendar. The Great Market at Tlatelolco, the twin city of the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan, was described by Spanish conquistadors with awe, capable of accommodating tens of thousands of buyers and sellers in a single day. The organization of this seemingly chaotic event was in fact a masterpiece of urban planning and social control. The market was meticulously zoned by product. All the gold sellers were in one quarter, the embroiderers in another, the pottery merchants in yet another, and the food vendors, from maize and beans to chili peppers and even live animals, in their own specific section. This architectural zoning through spatial allocation was incredibly smart. It allowed for efficient oversight by the state-appointed market officials, who could easily monitor prices and quality within each designated category to prevent fraud and ensure fair standards. It also made the experience efficient for buyers, who could comparison shop easily within a single zone. But the true genius of the changuis was its role in binding a diverse and often fractious empire together through economic interdependence. The Aztec realm was a collection of conquered city-states and different ethnic groups, all with their own goods and specialties. The market at Tlatelolco became the neutral, central clearinghouse for the entire region. A farmer from the Xochimilco Chinampas or floating gardens would bring his fresh produce, while an obsidian napper from the Otomi lands would bring his razor-sharp blades and tools. A feather worker from the tropical lowlands would bring iridescent Quetzal feathers for the magnificent headdresses of the nobility, and a merchant from distant Guerrero might bring jade and other precious stones. Within the structured chaos of the changuis, these diverse groups were not rivals. They were necessary partners in a vast economic network. The desire to access the goods of others provided a powerful, practical incentive to maintain peaceful relations. Why wage war on the people who supply the jade for your rituals or the salt for your food? The marketplace, through its very design and organization, transformed potential ethnic and political tensions into mutually beneficial commercial relationships, making peace far more valuable than conflict. This architectural orchestration of commerce served another critical government function. It made the economy visible and therefore taxable. A scattered, informal trade network is incredibly difficult for a central authority to monitor and tax effectively. But by designing a central marketplace, whether the permanent Greek agora surrounded by stores or the cyclical Aztec changuis, the state created a natural bottleneck where economic activity could be easily observed and regulated. Specialized officials patrolled these spaces, settling disputes, standardizing weights and measures, and collecting taxes and fees on transactions. This was not simply revenue extraction, it was a fundamental service. The taxes collected paid for the very infrastructure that made the complex market possible: the maintenance of the paving stones, the security provided by guards, the courts that would enforce contracts, and the clean water available at public fountains. This created a virtuous cycle. The state provided a safe, efficient, and predictable environment for trade, which encouraged more merchants to participate and more wealth to be generated, which in turn increased tax revenue for the state to invest back into public goods that further strengthened peace and prosperity. The marketplace architecture was the physical engine of this cycle, a tangible space where the social contract between the governed and their government was actively negotiated and renewed with every sale. It proved that peace could be built not just with walls and weapons, but with weights, measures, and a well-designed place for people to come together and trade. Yet beyond the bustling markets and formidable walls, the most enduring architecture of peace was not built of stone to defend the body, but of knowledge to enlighten the mind. Ancient rulers came to a profound realization: a populace educated in the laws, traditions, and administrative needs of the state was inherently more stable, cooperative, and self-governing. This insight led to the creation of the first dedicated educational complexes, architectural investments in human capital that would become the silent, steady engines of informed governance. In the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, this took the form of the adaba, or tablet house. These were not grand public buildings, but often rooms attached to temples or palaces, yet their design was meticulously functional for their purpose. The floors were often covered in a thick layer of sand, a practical feature that allowed student scribes to smooth out their practice tablets and start again. Benches lined the walls, and storage niches held the precious raw materials of learning, lumps of wet clay and bundles of sharpened reed style. Within these purpose-built spaces, a rigorous curriculum unfolded, training the scribes who would become the essential bureaucrats of the world's first states. They learned not only the incredibly complex cuneiform script, but also the standardized forms for legal contracts, property deeds, tax records, and diplomatic correspondence. This architectural commitment to education created a unified administrative class that spoke the same written language and followed the same procedures from one city-state to the next. By ensuring that laws were recorded accurately and disseminated consistently, the adaba system reduced the misunderstandings and arbitrary judgments that so often sparked disputes between citizens or between rival officials within the government itself. The schoolroom, in its humble way, was as vital to peace as the courthouse or the city wall, for it built the framework of a common language and a shared bureaucratic reality. This concept of centralized knowledge as a pillar of governance reached its spectacular apex with the legendary Library of Alexandria. Founded in the 3rd century BCE by Ptolemy I, this was not merely a repository for scrolls. It was nothing less than an architecturally embodied mission to collect, organize, and understand all of the world's knowledge. Housed within or adjacent to the Mausoleum, a temple dedicated to the Muses, the library was part of a larger research institution that offered lodging, a communal dining hall, and generous salaries for the greatest scholars, poets, and scientists of the age. The architecture itself was designed to facilitate this grand collaboration. Long, shaded colonnades provided space for peripatetic debate and discussion, while specialized rooms were likely designed for the particular needs of literary analysis, astronomical observation, or anatomical study. The heart of the complex was, of course, the collection itself, organized with a revolutionary system created by the librarian Callimachus, the Pinax, which functioned as the first known library catalog, allowing for the efficient retrieval of any scroll among an estimated 400,000. This architectural and intellectual infrastructure served a direct governmental purpose. By attracting the brightest minds to the capital, the Ptolemies were not merely showing off, they were building the ultimate think tank for the administration of their kingdom. Scholars at the library applied their genius to practical problems of state, improving agricultural yields, designing more powerful siege engines, mapping trade routes, understanding diseases that afflicted the population, and standardizing calendars for tax collection and religious festivals. The library was the crown jewel of the state's intellectual infrastructure, a powerful tool for reducing the unknowns that could destabilize a realm: famine, technical inferiority, and poor logistics. A government that could base its decisions on the best available knowledge gathered from across the known world was a government that could preempt crises and administer with a competence that fostered widespread public trust and compliance. The very existence of such institutions sent a powerful message to the citizenry about the values of the state. By investing significant resources in the architecture of education, from the simple clay-lined aduba to the magnificent colonnades of the Mausoleum, a ruler was publicly committing to a vision of governance rooted in reason, record-keeping, and cultural prestige rather than sheer brute force. This cultivated a crucial sense of civic virtue and shared identity. In ancient Athens, the gymnasium was another architectural form that served an educational and socializing purpose. These were not just athletic grounds but sprawling complexes with running tracks, wrestling pits, lecture halls, and bathing facilities. They were the premier social hubs for Athenian youth, where they trained their bodies and, just as importantly, engaged in philosophical and political discourse under the tutelage of sophists and philosophers. This architectural environment fostered the ideal of the educated citizen soldier, a man prepared to both defend the city and participate intelligently in its democratic governance. The gymnasium was a factory for informed citizenship, producing individuals who understood the laws, the history, and the responsibilities of belonging to the polis. This shared educational experience built a common cultural framework that reduced factionalism and made civic life more predictable and harmonious. When citizens are educated in the same traditions and legal principles, they are more likely to resolve their differences through the established systems of law and rhetoric rather than through violence. The architecture of education, therefore, worked on two levels. It produced the skilled bureaucrats who administered the state efficiently and fairly, and it cultivated a knowledgeable citizenry that understood and supported the system, creating a virtuous cycle of enlightenment and stability that proved knowledge, when architecturally nurtured, is the most durable foundation for lasting peace. Perhaps the ultimate test of any architectural blueprint for peace is not how well it serves a single generation, but how gracefully it adapts to serve those that follow. The most brilliant ancient designs understood a profound truth: stone may be permanent, but human needs are not. Societies change, beliefs evolve, and political systems transform. A government that clings to rigid, inflexible structures risks having those very structures become monuments to its own irrelevance, sparking the very conflicts they were meant to prevent. This is why the history of ancient architecture is filled with stunning examples of adaptive reuse, where the physical shell of the past was ingeniously retrofitted to house the spirit of the present, proving that the most sustainable form of governance is one that can bend without breaking. No example illustrates this principle more powerfully than the transformation of the Roman basilica. In its original imperial context, the basilica was the undeniable architectural embodiment of secular Roman power and administration. These were not temples, they were grand, sprawling public halls often located in the heart of the forum. Their design was a masterpiece of civic functionality, a vast central nave flanked by side aisles separated by rows of columns, all covered by a towering timber trussed roof. Light would pour in from clerestory windows high above, illuminating the bustling activity below. Here, beneath these soaring ceilings, magistrates presided over courts of law, merchants negotiated major contracts, and city officials conducted the daily business of running an empire. The basilica was the physical headquarters of Roman governance, its spacious, open plan designed to facilitate the transparent, orderly, and public exercise of authority. Its very architecture spoke of reason, bureaucracy, and the far-reaching power of the state. Then, the empire's political landscape underwent a seismic shift. With the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, Christianity moved from a persecuted sect to a tolerated, and then officially favored religion. Almost overnight, the nascent Christian church needed large, dignified, and permanent spaces to accommodate its rapidly growing congregations. Building magnificent new structures from scratch was a slow and prohibitively expensive proposition. The solution was a breathtaking act of architectural alchemy. The new church looked at the old imperial basilicas and saw a perfect ready-made solution. The form was already deeply respected by the populace. Its spacious nave could easily hold a large congregation. The raised platform at one end, where the Roman magistrate would have sat to dispense judgment, became the perfect setting for the altar and the clergy. The side aisles provided circulation space for processions. By simply reorienting the focus from a temporal judge to a divine sacrifice, the basilica was spiritually reborn. This was far more than a practical recycling of buildings. It was a brilliant political and theological strategy. By taking over the architecture of Roman civil authority, the church was signaling a peaceful transfer of power. It was physically embedding itself into the existing urban fabric and psychological framework of its people, suggesting continuity rather than violent revolution. The citizen who once came to this building to receive a legal verdict from a Roman official now came to receive spiritual grace from a Christian priest, all within the same familiar, awe-inspiring space. This adaptive reuse prevented a potentially violent culture clash. Instead of tearing down the symbols of the old pagan order, which could have sparked resentment and conflict, the new Christian government repurposed them, weaving its own narrative into the enduring stone of the city. The message was one of inclusion and stability. The architecture of governance remains, but its purpose has been sanctified and elevated. This pattern of symbolic reuse echoes across other cultures and eras. In Egypt, the mighty stone blocks of pharaonic temples and monuments were frequently quarried by later dynasties, including the Ptolemaic and Roman rulers, to build their own structures. While sometimes seen as mere pragmatism, this too was a form of adaptive political messaging. By incorporating the stones of a Ramses or an Amenhotep into the foundations of a new temple or city wall, a new ruler was physically grounding his own reign in the deep, legitimizing history of the land. He was saying, "I am not destroying the past, I am building upon it." Similarly, across the former Roman Empire, the sturdy walls of abandoned forts, known as castra, often formed the defensive cores of medieval towns. The Saxon settlement of Winchester grew within the protective shell of a Roman fortress, and the layout of its streets still echoes the old Roman grid. The new inhabitants didn't possess the engineering knowledge to build walls of that scale and strength, but they understood their immense value. They adapted the military architecture of a fallen empire to provide security for a new kind of community, a fusion of past and present that provided continuity and safety in a turbulent age. This ancient wisdom holds a crucial lesson for us today. The most enduring peace is not found in building immutable, rigid structures destined to become obsolete. True, lasting stability is achieved by designing systems and cities with inherent flexibility. It is the wisdom to build with a vision for the future that includes the certainty of change. The governments that thrived were those that saw their architecture not as a final statement, but as a versatile framework, a stage that could be reset for the next act in the human drama. They understood that the best way to honor the past was not to embalm it, but to allow it to live on, transformed in the service of the present. By designing for adaptability, they ensured that their most profound blueprints for peace would never be finished, but would continue to evolve, keeping pace with the ever-changing heart of humanity. From the orderly grids of Mohenjo-Daro to the awe-inspiring forums of Rome, we've journeyed through a hidden world where stone and mortar were not merely for shelter, but the very instruments of order, stability, and peace. These civilizations understood something we often forget in our modern age of steel and glass. The spaces we inhabit are not passive backdrops to our lives. They are active, powerful forces that silently sculpt our behavior, guide our interactions, and either reinforce or undermine the systems meant to govern us. Every wide avenue in Teotihuacan, every brick in the Great Bath's drainage system, every carefully placed seat in the theater of Epidaurus was a calculated decision, a deliberate stroke on a blueprint for a society that could not only survive but truly flourish. This was architecture wielded with intention, a physical manifestation of a social contract designed to preempt conflict, inspire unity, and legitimize authority through sheer, overwhelming presence. The true genius of these ancient planners lies in their holistic understanding of human needs. They didn't just build walls to keep invaders out. They built granaries to keep hunger at bay and designed aqueducts to deliver health and equity. They didn't only erect intimidating palaces for administrators, they also carved out public squares for dialogue and planted serene gardens for respite. They addressed the body with sanitation, the mind with education, and the spirit with celestial alignments and ritualized spectacle. This multi-layered approach reveals a profound insight. Lasting peace cannot be enforced by threat alone. It must be cultivated through 1,000 daily provisions for dignity, security, and meaning, all woven into the very fabric of the city. The resilience of these designs, some still influencing urban layouts thousands of years later, is a testament to their effectiveness. They created environments where the architecture itself did the work of governance, constantly, silently, and pervasively guiding citizens toward a collective, peaceful existence. As we look around our own modern cities with their towering skyscrapers, sprawling suburbs, and complex transit networks, we must ask ourselves what kind of society our own blueprints are building. Do our public housing projects promote community or isolation? Do our office parks foster collaboration or competition? Are our streets designed for human connection or merely for the efficient movement of vehicles? The ancient lessons are not relics. They are remarkably relevant lenses through which to examine our contemporary challenges of social isolation, economic disparity, and political polarization. The core principle remains unchanged. Design shapes destiny. The choices we make in concrete, green space, and public infrastructure today are the hidden blueprints for the peace or conflict of tomorrow. We have the opportunity to learn from these master builders of the past, to consciously design not just for efficiency and profit, but for human well-being and social harmony, creating modern landscapes that, like their ancient predecessors, actively build a better world for everyone.